Hi, welcome to another edition of FreightWaves Now. It is Wednesday, hump day, the in-between time. Which way are we going? And that is actually one of the questions we're going to be looking at as we look at a variety of things today in today's episode. We're visited by Nick Austin telling us what's happening as the cold really begins to hit and it turns winter across the U.S. We're going to be talking to Zach Strickland, the Sultan of Sonar, looking at volumes. Also, a little bit of a look at macroeconomic data. Wow, there's some weird and wild things happening. We have no idea which way it's going. Finally, we're visited also by Dean Croke, our Chief Analytics Officer, and he's going to be talking about used truck prices. Kind of an in-between time with that too. Which way are we going? That's what we're going to figure out on today's episode. So Nick, welcome back again as always.
Chad.
Yes, tell us about the volatility going on across the U.S.
We're going to the Northeast. Let's take a little trip to the Northeast part of the country. So the lake effect snow machine, which we have all heard about, they're used to lake effect snow in the wintertime across the Great Lakes, especially the eastern Great Lakes.
It is happening.
Areas like Cleveland, Buffalo, Rochester, all the way up to northern Maine. We're talking about areas that could see 6 to 12 inches of snow, possibly 12 to 18 inches in some pockets of those areas of the Northeast.
That's brutal for a heavy population center of the U.S.
Well, it is, and they're used to lake effect snows, but there's also going to be a lot of wind. That's going to be I think, the bigger problem for truckers out there. There will be some icy spots on roads, but very, very strong winds. That's all these interior portions of the Northeast, right along the Canadian border, those interior areas. So winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour. That's going to cause a lot of problems, especially for anyone trying to haul light loads or deadheading. It's going to be really difficult. So, and if you notice too, the Syracuse market, there's been an increase in outbound volumes there.
Yeah,
coming out of the Syracuse market. Yeah. So, and that's one of the areas that's in the lake effect snow belt, we'll say. And the strong winds for today and tomorrow. This is
a number of somewhat heated markets,
right?
So a lot of activity will be happening in that very troublesome area,
right? So it's just going to be getting freight and that additional volume, that increased volume out of there is just going to be a little tricky, just with all the snow and the wind.
Okay,
that's today and tomorrow as well. In some areas, it's going to pick up today. In other areas, it'll pick up tonight and through the day tomorrow.
What else are we looking at?
Well, another big problem area is along the California coast, from around San Francisco all the way up the northern California coast to near right at the Oregon line. A lot of strong winds there too, especially in the mountains. And right here in Northern California, interior parts of Northern California, where we call it's right near Mount Shasta, the Mount Shasta region.
Yes.
There's also going to be pockets of heavy rain. So that could cause mudslides, rock slides, which might end up blocking some routes. The winds, not only on the west coast, but also in the Northeast, could also knock down large tree limbs and power lines.
Okay.
Those could end up potentially blocking some roads. There'll be some power outages as well. So those are the two big weather areas as far as the U.S. for today and tomorrow.
What's it like briefly in the southeast, and is it still windy in the west where we don't see as much, but of course things are happening?
Right, no, I know those wild winds out in the Wild West, they have calmed down for today, so it's not as bad. There aren't a lot of really large areas of problems as far as wind, except up in the Northeast with that lake effect snow.
Okay.
The southern U.S. from Texas all the way to Florida looking good. But I want to mention another thing too.
Yeah.
With all the snow and the wind up in the Northeast, very, very, very cold wind chills. That's when you factor in the wind and the temperature.
Yeah.
So any truckers, they really, really need to dress warmly. When you're taking their breaks, of course, they're going to want to stay inside because we're talking about wind chills in some parts of the Northeast and also in the Allegheny Mountains of West Virginia, where the wind chills tonight are going to be down to 0 or possibly as cold as 10 or 15 below 0. That's brutally cold wind chills, so got to be careful of that too. Stay safe out there.
Thank you so much, Nick Austin, for that update. That is fantastic. Now let's bring on market expert Zach Strickland. Everybody, give him a big hand out there in FreightWaves land. Yeah, here he is, the Sultan of Sonar.
Thank you.
Is there any, whoa, I am seeing some exciting increases in tender volumes. Is this correct?
Yes, you are. So what we've got pulled up here is the tender volume index for the United States.
Yes.
So what we saw most of last year was this big sweeping tender volume that kind of shot up throughout the year, and then it kind of settled back down in the third and fourth quarter.
And you pulled up an interesting, cross comparison here, the FBX. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the FBX. So what the FBX does is it measures the spot market price for the 40-foot container coming from China to North American West Coast. And this particular one that I have pulled up here, we have several other lanes and sonar, but this is the one I think this is most interesting. At least for us right now, because I think
because there's a big cross comparison for how contrasted with volumes as opposed to, whoa, what is happening here?
So you see this big kind of increasing drive. So this is kind of the story that we followed throughout the third and fourth quarter this year. Kind of all this tariff concern, everybody pulling all this volume into the country. It hits the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach more often than not. That's the biggest. Two biggest ports in the country, except for Newark, of course. But then, into the fourth quarter, it kept volume up in the Los Angeles market. And one of the things that we've seen here recently is the Los Angeles market volume shot up here in the last couple of days, returning to levels that we hadn't seen until about this period right here. Right when right around Thanksgiving, when everybody's pulling forward for the holiday, you have all this container inbound, it has to get into the country. They were thinking that the January 1st deadline is going to hit. Then they have an extension. So one of the things that we're going to watch this year is the Los Angeles market is, it's kind of been the bellwether of freight market destabilization in the last half of 2018, if you will.
And I was thinking yesterday we were, at least 1,000 points lower. We were maybe at 8,400.
Yeah.
And Crosby, the Cross, anticipated that within a week's time we would be back to the 10,000 level. So it's all happening.
Yeah. Well, and the thing to note here is this rate. You see this big jump in the Prevost rate here in the last part because it calmed down.
Right.
Everything kind of smoothed out here in December because think about this. They were expecting the volume from the containers to kind of die out because everybody pulled it forward. The boats aren't going to make it in time to get off through customs. And then now they have an extension. So now they have another 30 days or so before Chinese New Year. We're starting to see the early warning signs of that happening right now.
Well, okay, now, so speaking of early warning signs, and this is part of our theme today of wondering where things are going. Okay, great, so volumes are going up, but we're getting a lot of feedback that maybe we're still entering into some difficult, not as optimistic territory. So, and how long-lived will this uptick be? What is 2019 shaping up to be? We are now going to segue into looking at some economic data that we source from the Institute of Supply Management. We call it the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index. It's the manufacturers are surveyed, and this is sort of they self-report on this information. But okay, so we've got right here this chart we're looking at, Zach. This is the 5-year, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It would be interesting to look at the 1 year too, because if we talk about right now we're at 54.1%, which if you compare that to just like in 2016, boy, are we doing good, right? However, we're for the first time as we look at this chart, boy, look at how high it was in July and really at the end of August. It is It is I think of 2018. December was ended up at the lowest point of any of the metrics for the entire year of 2018.
And 2017 as well.
Oh, so, yeah.
It's the last 2 years. So
okay.
For the PMI, you have to think about anything that's above 50 is considered an expansion, economic expansion.
Right.
Anything below 50 is considered a contraction with the economy.
So technically, we're still in growth.
We're still in growth mode, and everybody's going to say they're all seeing signs of economic slowing. not contraction. There's a big difference there, and I think that can kind of get blown out of proportion at times. I mean, I'm not like the chief economist or anything, but at the same time, this is a pretty significant drop.
Yeah, and that's what, to me, that's kind of what's scaring me a little bit, like the precipitous decline. Manufacturers are blaming it, no shock here, on the tariffs and the trade war. And it's, where is this headed?
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows where it's headed just yet. Obviously, you have to think about it as, were we not in a super overheated period of expansion here? Because anytime we have these things like the tariffs, for instance, and you saw the earlier chart where all of this volume comes into the country, en masse, and it's because everybody's kind of panicked. They're emotional about it. So it creates this pulling forward of activity.
Yeah, but wasn't that just for 3 or 4 months of the panic?
It was
already all year.
All year. Once they started talking about it, there's this, it pulls forward. And those tax cuts, the tax cuts were for a year. So you literally have this shortened period of overheated activity. Well, once that goes out, people stop buying trucks. People stop, doing the things that they do to kind of reinvest in their processes, because they know it's going to cost them more money in the next year or the next bit. That's why we're constantly watching that LA port right now, because once that kind of goes away and that situation fades, then we're going to know whether or not the economy is going to kind of subside or kind of start building back again on a more sustainable growth pace.
So you feel like 2018, as an exciting of a year as it was it an anomaly? It was a tax cut, a once in a generation tax cut. It was the worry and anticipation of tariffs. Is that kind of every year is going to be a little different,
right?
But what?
No, well, for sure. I personally think that last year was kind of an anomaly. We were in this kind of pseudo bubble, if you will. Not really it's going to pop and everything's going to go to hell, but at the same time, it cannot sustain. We had a 4.2% GDP growth over the summer. That's not sustainable. Any economist knows that. That's Economics 201. And it's because you simply can't keep up the pace. Wages do not increase at 4.5% in a quarter. You know what I'm saying? In a year.
Right.
It takes time for people to kind of build up their expenditures. They don't just go out and say, well, I've got a windfall.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. It's a little bit of an in-between time. There are positive signs of growth, maybe a little bit of a correction happening so far as we can tell you right now. That is what is going on. Thank you so much for that insight and analysis, Sultan. Now let us bring us up Chief Analytics Officer, the master of the analysis here, Dean Croke. Joining us again. Thanks, Dean, for being here. Tell us, what are we seeing with using this index of the 3-year-old used truck price index across the U.S.?
Yeah, Chad, I wanted to talk a little bit about today on the subject of fuel efficiency and how it's impacting used truck prices. Because if you look on the highway today, you see lots of aerodynamic trucks are kind of more the norm. And if you looked at the latest NAC FE report, which is the North American Council for Freight Efficiency, it shows that fleets that adopt modern fuel-efficient technology are running mid-sevens in terms of MPG.
Right.
And there was a time when the norm for all trucks globally was around 6 miles per gallon.
Right,
from the six-cylinder inline kind of run slow, gear fast truck specs. What's really interesting is that the business as usual fleets that do nothing are still running in the mid-sixes. That's about 1 mile per gallon less than the fleets that adopt the technology. Now,
the technology of aerodynamics,
skirts, aerodynamics,
all the things that you can do.
Everything, curved mirrors, curved headlights, like on the new 389 Peterbilts, nose cones, trailer cones, all sorts of things you can do to decrease drag and increase efficiency. The all average for the country now in terms of MPG is high nines.
Wow!
Right? So it's kind of interesting that there's a 11% drop if you don't use the technology in terms of MPG.
That's significant.
And the all average is about 20% lower than the trucks that are running in the big fleets. Now, what this got to do with used truck prices is, of course, that some of the trucks in our index Some aren't very fuel efficient. They're the older model Freightliners and Volvos that have the more squarer cabs.
Okay.
Some of the 3 and 4 year old ones are the more aerodynamic Cascadias, Columbia class, the more aerodynamic Peterbilts and Kenworths. So what's happening is that there's a couple of things driving diesel prices.
And what do you have brought up here as cross comparisons for us as we're looking at this chart?
The difference here is that on the older trucks, they're increasing in price, whereas the newer trucks are decreasing in price.
Okay, so you're cross comparing it to 4-year-old and 5-year-old trucks.
Now, the difference here, this is what's happening. About 30% of all US used trucks go to Mexico. And in December, Mexico bought in new ultra-low sulfur diesel rigs, which require trucks to run 15 parts per million sulfur content, which is equivalent to the EPA 2007 regulation.
Wow.
Right? Now, here's the rub. Those older trucks are already lower priced in Mexico. There won't be much impact on our used truck indexes here. But the newer trucks that meet both the 2007 reg with DEF and the 2010 reg, which is DEF and selective catalytic converter, those newer trucks, lower mileage newer trucks, I think of what we're seeing here in the 5-year-old band. They've increased 2% in price since October, whereas the other trucks have dropped about 5% in price. So I think what's happening is as fleets in Mexico are consuming US used trucks, they're now looking towards more fuel efficient trucks. And to keep in mind, the Mexico reg was pushed back quite a ways. It came into effect in December.
Okay.
So fleets were already buying used trucks last year from the American market that already met the 07 and 2010 regulation. And that's what we're seeing here. So the data for December truck prices isn't out yet. We're watching for that very closely. But what's interesting here is that most used truck prices increased about 10% over the entire 2018.
Yeah.
What's different now is that the older trucks that meet the earlier emission standards are starting to increase in price. And that could be as a result of the new regulations in Mexico.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. So the 3 and 4-year-old, they've gone slight downtick,
right.
while that 5-year-old kind of been trending up
Yeah.
and ended on the uptick.
And most of these trucks in here are your typical Volvos, Freightliners, then Kenworth, then Peterbilt, then Western Star. But the bulk of your trucks in this index here are going to be the most common trucks you see on the road, which are the fuel-efficient Freightliners and Volvos.
Interesting. I mean, do you think that now that they are making more fuel-efficient trucks, that they'll hold their value for a longer period of time as they become used?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think in the larger fleets in particular, where operating costs are significant. So if you look at our truckload carrier indexes that we've got, if you look at the net operating cost of fuel, as a percentage of operating costs, it's dropped 40% year to date.
Wow.
So for the fleets that adopt fuel-efficient technology, their operating costs are down under 5% of net operating costs at the moment. So I think what will happen is there's an interesting mix going on right now. We've got record levels of Class 8 truck orders in 2018 coming out of factories. So what that's doing is as fleets shorten the age of the fleet and increase their trade cycles, it's pushing more used trucks onto the market, which is increasing the supply and decreasing the prices, which is what we're seeing here on the downward price pressure. But I think what will happen is over time, once we get through this bubble of Class 8 truck orders, Class 8 truck orders drop right down in December in terms of net orders. Yeah. I think what will happen in 2019, we'll see a little bit more stabilisation, but I think we'll also see some divergence in pricing based on model and make and year of truck. They've tended to be very sticky, but I think this could be a departure from the trend.
And operating costs of fuel, maybe the highest for carriers, as well as what about for owner operators who have smaller equipment? Do they have? Is it fuel? Is that the main?
So if you're talking about fleets in the 300 truck range, they tend to be big consumers of the trucks that come off lease from the large truckload carriers at sort of the 3-year, 330,000 mile mark. Oh. So that's where they tend to go into that market. Uh-huh. The guys that are owner operators that have less aerodynamic trucks, who are more interested in how the truck looks than how it runs, because there's a style thing. Sure. And that's why you see a lot of owner operators with big hoods. That's why you see a lot of trucks. International went with the Lone Star to try and compete with the 379 and the W900 to have a big long hood, because if you're a professional truck driver, it's as much about image as it is about cost. So you'll absorb some of that cost to look cool. Absolutely. There's a huge price for looking cool. Oh, wow. And so your Grumpy Pete looks pretty cool. Is it from 2003? Yeah, I run about 6.5 miles per gallon in my pre-emission Caterpillar engine. It's not very aerodynamic, but the miles feel really good.
Fun. All right. Well, feeling good here today on Wednesday, Hump Day, is where, we're feeling positive in a lot of ways. Maybe have a little bit of anxiety, but we don't want to have undue anxiety and go freak out and do silly things, because, hey, 2019 could be a very positive year too. We're bringing it to you every single day as we think about the market conditions and what is happening right now. So 4 o'clock, tune in, my favorite time of the day, and catch us on Twitter and, FreightWaves.com. Here for you every day. Stay safe out there.